No substitutes, Chair.
No. The declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the 16th of November, we can't approve those because we're not quorum. We just have to, for those present, are we happy with those? That seems very straightforward. Yeah. Just pinching against. Right. Okay. Item 5 then is the Trailblazer devolution deal. That's you, I think, one.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. This is the latest update report on the development of the Trailblazer devolution deal proposals, as has been reported to this board on a regular basis since February of last year, 2022. The combined authority and the local authorities have been working on a set of proposals to government following the Levelling Up white paper, and this paper sets out the current position in terms of where we are in terms of those proposals regarding housing and land portfolio areas and the next steps for those tasks as well. So under section 2, we've got the breakdown of the 4 particular areas, and then in section 3 there's a summary of each of those. So 4 main asks from this portfolio area are a single regeneration fund for the region, give us more flexibility in the future. A West Midlands Land Reform Programme, which follows the work of the Public Land Task Force and the Public Land Charter, looking to streamline the way public land is used in the region and also to give us more access to government land in the region. And the affordable housing package, including additional funding to that which is already delivered within the region. And then the levelling up zones. And it's just important to note, Chair, this is a continuing part of the key part of the proposals to government is the levelling up zones, which are distinct from the investment zone proposals that government were asking us to submit towards October, November last year. These continue to be a central focus for my authorities in developing these proposals, and we're continuing to work with local authorities on a weekly, sometimes daily basis in terms of gathering the detail and the evidence for each of these investment zones that are proposed. Zones that are proposed. And then section 4, we have the next steps in terms of ongoing co-development of these proposals, ongoing negotiations with government, and then updates to the mayor and metro leaders as per the meeting last week. So that's just a summary of the paper, Chair, but let's take any questions.
The question I have, Rob, is that there is an assumption that the Wednesbury to Brierley Hill Metro will go ahead. That's still a bit uncertain. What's our fallback position if that doesn't happen in relation to the efforts and finances we put into that section?
So I think in terms of that metro line, Chair, and the wider work, so it's right to say that is a key one of the key zones that we're looking at as part of the levelling up zones, but there are also other conversations and explorations of how we can find the funding to develop that. And colleagues in TFWM and ourselves are working closely with Dudley and other local partners on how we get to that position. Again, I think details we need today on where we are with that, but I can sort of come back to the board.
Thank you. On the whole, it's welcomed by Sandwell because we have many sites that are difficult to deliver. So that was section 1. In section 4, the chair picked up the Wednesbury to Brierley Hill, and then there is that these need to be looked at 2 separate ones because we've said we'll take it from Wednesbury to the boundary, and then from boundary to Dudley to Brierley Hill. So we need to look at these as 2 separate level up zones. Thank you.
Yes, to follow on from that, did take my call. My understanding is certainly I was instrumental in that decision to get it to Dudley, but of course it's from there on that we have the issues. That's the point you're making, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, this paper was circulated before we made some amendments to the terminology and language. So in a more recent document that we're working on since this paper was circulated, we have separated those 2 parts of that extension. So they are described differently and separately, I should say.
Thank you.
Okay. Any comments or questions on that? No? Okay, then, can we then approve the Oh, sorry, my eyes aren't that good, Councillor Overton, sorry about that. Far away.
It's all right. I just wanted to say that it's really good that this is back on track of the Devo deal, especially for places like us and Talbot as well with the Single Regeneration Fund, because we do have problems with state renewal, etc. So I think it's really positive, and I just wanted to make that statement for the report, really.
Yeah, there's a bit of noise around the Levelling Up Fund, but I think what we've got to do is to make sure that we keep our nose to the grindstone here. We've been very successful through the Housing and Land Board since its inception, and that success I hope will continue. All right, we happy with the recommendation of the report then? Right, that's agreed. Thank you. We'll have to go to the main board for confirmation. Moving on then to item 6, which is the quarterly housing report.
It's me, Chair. So this is our regular update on progress against the deliverables. So just a reminder that the deliverables for the housing and land portfolio are agreed by the CA board each February. So this is an update on the deliverables that were agreed last February. 3 main highlights to flag. One is the work following on around the Public Land Charter and the work with the Cabinet Office on being the first national place pilot in the country. So this is the goal, to work with government on a new approach to the disposal of government land. The second is the work that's being done on working with strategic partners, particularly the private sector, and also the work that we are doing with local authorities on developing the project pipelines. So we've got really clear long-term project pipelines of housing and regeneration projects for each local area. And then the third one is the one that Rob has just updated the board on, which is around the progress on the devolution deal. And as Councillor Overton was just referring to, there is a renewed energy now, it seems, from central government around progressing this Trailblazer devolution deal. Chair, if I can also just use the opportunity while I've got the mic to refer to the appendix. So what we've done in previous years is we brought the housing and land portfolio deliverables that are going to be agreed by the CA board to this board before they go to the CA board. So you'll see in Appendix 1 the housing and land portfolio deliverables for 2020. That should say 2023-2024. So these are going to be the ones that are going to be moving forward to the next year. So again, we will then report on these each quarter back to the board. So Chair, if anyone's got any views on those deliverables, this is the opportunity to say so. They are broadly based on the same areas of work as the previous year. Following on from your remark, Chair, that these do seem to be areas where we're able to make quite a tangible difference and added value within the combined authority. So thanks, Chair. Open out to the board.
I think where I see one of the focuses is at 3.4, where we need to be looking at local town and city centres. I think we all know that our centres, town centres and city centres, are certainly in decline from a retail point of view, and we need to reinvent those some way. And I think the Housing and Land Board have an input there, because some of the retail will lend itself to residential. I'm a firm believer if people live in town centres, they'll spend their money in town centres. Certainly in my area, there's an application for about 270 apartments on top of the retail sector, which is under permitted development, which of course is a change in tactics on the planning point of view. But if that comes off and it seems to be gathering momentum, then effectively I think the first stage of those building blocks will be in place. So I can't speak for any other town city centres, but certainly Birmingham seems alive, and certainly Solihull is very busy in my visits there. But I think on the outlying districts, then we do struggle a bit, to be honest. And I think the reason for that is the retail sector. We haven't got a destination shop. I mean, in Solihull, they're fortunate they've got John Lewis and they've got Apple. the Apple Store, which obviously brings footfall. Birmingham in itself stands alone, I think, with all of the variation of things. But it's interesting that Marks and Spencer seem to be wanting to reinvent themselves in town centres, in particular targeting some of the old Debenhams buildings. So that would be interesting. I think we need to keep a track on where they're going. All right.
Well, thank you. I think I agree with you on town centres. I think we need to revision our town centres, because I think, you know, I'd rather see 2,000 houses built in Solihull town centre than 2,000 houses built in the green belt.
Sorry.
Yeah, and you've got the opportunity. Just quickly on digress on Marks and Spencer's, they've left Solihull, gone to an out of town area in Monksbath, and I think that's had a detrimental effect. One thing that we did well in Solihull is we actually own Mel Square now as a council. We bought that. And that gives us a strategic way, because some developer or some owners will sit on real estate and not invest in it because they want to have the capital value. And I think that's something where we to think about whether we should start acquiring, you know, other town centres, so we have that control of development and control when we develop, and we don't make sure that developers lay town centres dry. I mean, in Dorridge, my village, we had a small village centre owned by investment companies. It was dead. It was desolate. Then Sainsbury's comes in and it just brings life to the village. But just going back to that target Appendix 1, I don't see anywhere number of houses built as a deliverable.
So the only target the combined authority works to is the overall housing deal target of 215,000 homes to 2031. Individual housing targets are left with local authorities for the local planning process.
I mean, as a sort of a number that we should see in our reports, how many houses have been built. We should have that front and centre. That's what's the whole purpose of it, isn't it?
We could definitely provide that. At the moment, that tends to be provided in the private section, but I don't think there's any problem. Rob, no, there's no problem in providing that up front about the progress on that, Chair.
Okay. I do make the point, I hope quite strongly, that we need to look at focus at redundant retail and try and bring those developers forward. And the problem we have, of course, is many of the owners of the shops, as you said, they are out of town landlords. And with the relaxation on business rates, or certainly the change in business rates, support, call it what you like, then quite honestly, there's no incentive for them to do anything with it. The only journey we've had with shopping centres is the Labour Party, God bless them, when they were in control for a short space of time, bought a shopping centre in the central Walsall, which is the biggest disaster ever. But we're trying to work through that. Sorry. That's the trouble, isn't it? Team still works when you... My... My monitoring officer. You can't turn Teams off. Well, I don't know.
Multiple devices as well.
Yes, it is. Works both ways.
Can I just make a point on the?
Sorry.
So at the CA board last week, we did announce that the results of the previous year's housing numbers was 16,700. So there has been quite a big increase since the pandemic. The housing numbers of the region dropped during the pandemic. They have increased, but we are expecting this year, because there is quite a lot of headwinds through obviously construction prices, energy, the cost of inflation. So we are monitoring those numbers quite closely for this year in terms of what the numbers will look like. So the year for 21-22 was looking very positive, back up to above the level we need for the housing deal. But it'll be interesting to see what the numbers look like for this year, given those headwinds that the economy is facing. That's all I was going to say, Joe.
The monitoring officer, I'll be all right. In trouble again, Joe. Okay, you happy with that? Okay. We move on then to item 7. Sorry, item 8. West Midlands local transport plan.
I'm going to take Pat first on me. Yeah,
Pat.
future home strategy.
Oh, sorry, yes. look at the agenda, help, future home strategy.
Trying to finish it.
Thank you, Chair. This is a short report, Chair, to update the board on the work that we've been undertaking to date, and to ask you to consider the report and endorse the direction of travel. There are two matters that we're considering this: the basic fundamentals of developing a future home strategy and giving you an indication of the types of document that are being considered as part of a suite of documents that themselves form the strategy, and then highlighting the key considerations that are informing the development of the emerging technical standard. One of the things I'd like to highlight is in paragraph 2.1, where we refer to the discussions that we've had with Delivery Steering Group and the Future Homes Task Force. And I must highlight, those have been really excellent, the feedback that we've had from officers, members of the task force, and we remember that they're developers, investors, specialists in the field, they're suppliers. So we're canvassing a really broad range of opinion in developing the strategy. What's happening is that they're giving us a huge amount to think about, and we're working through that with officers and others and with the task force members themselves. But the benefit of that is that that's giving us some confidence that when we get to the end of this process and we have a strategy to bring towards you, we'll have covered all of the bases, and we'll have confidence that the strategy will be deliverable, and will have the kind of impact on development in the West Midlands that you're seeking to achieve. So with that, Chair, I'm happy to take questions on any of the detail, but it is a work in progress and the input's been fantastic.
Any questions or comments, Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I should reflect the business needs certainty, but business itself is very reluctant to change because they don't like change. Change produces risk, so they want to de-risk. I think when you talk, about these future home standards, there comes a point where you can talk too much. I'll give you an example. I remember the Montreal Protocol about the removal of CFCs. The company I work for used CFCs worldwide. They were really against the change of, to the fluorocarbons, changing the sort of that. They said have an impact on our manufacturing, and businesses will go out of business. But as soon as it was agreed and the target was set, we adapted, and we adapted within 2 years. And I think same with the building trade. At the moment is if we keep differing about this for, they'll always have excuses. They always have excuses. But if you just tell them in 5 years' time, this is the way it's going to be, and you give them, and the question you should be asking them is not how it will affect your business. Actually, what sort of lead time do we need to have the homes we need that are economical and deliverable? Once you get that in place, then the business will adapt, and those who don't adapt will go out of business. Well, that's capitalism for you, But in the end, people will come forward. People will say, actually, to do this, we need to adapt. But if you give them a mixed bag where they can have one method to the other method, they'll always go to brick. Yeah, in '92, I lived in America. They built a house in 3 weeks there, and it was bricked, but it wasn't brick, actually. It was actually wooden frame. It was built on a pile of sand, wooden frame, erected by tacking plywood, heavily insulated because there was deep south, so you had to have air conditioning, so it was heavily insulated. And then if you were posh, they cladded it with brick, stuck on bricks. And that was it. It was done in three weeks. You could build a house. So we ought to be able to do that in the UK, really.
We have.
Yeah.
In Walsall, we built 2 semi-detached houses in 2 weeks, as I recall. We've still got the time-lapse video somewhere. Joe will remember that. But yeah, there are 2 or 3 different kinds. Wood frame timber frame is one. And I used to supply the brick slips that went round that timber frame. I hated that business, actually. But it's the way McDonald's built their stores. But there is also the one that was built in Walsall. It came in the back of a lorry in pods, metal pods, and the concrete slab was on the floor. They bolted it in. And then, as you say, surrounded it with brick slips, and the insulation was unbelievable. I was amazed when you walked in, we met, you expected to get a bit of creak in that, but it didn't. So there are various ways of advanced manufacturing. People just tend to think of timber frame. It's interesting that the timber frame factory, which we had a hand in starting, Joe, when she was in a previous life in Walsall, with Accord, is now one of the big manufacturers of timber frame based in Aldridge, huge. And they're now just putting pods in kitchens and bathrooms, and they're moving forward with that. So, gentleman on the screen, I can see you now. Up away.
Yeah, just to ask on strategy, where does it link into legislation? Because the thing is, having a strategy, if you do impose that on developers, if other areas haven't got a strategy, they might go there where it's cheaper to build houses without the reducing carbon footprint than the area where the strategy is. But if the legislation from government is across the country, then it's far better for all councils to operate on an equal basis.
I think it's certainly down to the local planning authorities, in my view, to try and impose this, if imposition is the word, with developers. They always resist anything that obviously is going to cost them money or hit them in the pocket. But sadly, what we have to be careful of is it doesn't put the price of houses up. The way they have to sell it is, of course, is the energy saving cost people will get by way of these new system built houses, and of course the speed in which they can be delivered, which is a saving to any developer. But they will resist change, and traditional brick buildings are still favoured by some. It's interesting where the site that I mentioned, which we built back in Walsall some years ago, what I did find interesting is when I went on the site, there was only one skip. One skip on a site that was building hundreds of houses. It was the old depot in where we, but that says in itself, doesn't it? The wastage is not there as with traditional build. We all know if you go on a building site now, there's piles of bricks here, there, and everywhere. Breeze blocks broken, stuff lying around. It just looks like a bomb site most of the time. But certainly there will be resistance, there's no doubt about that. But I think what we ought to be looking at is see what we could do from a planning point of view. Andy?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. I think cost might be a factor, but it's not the whole picture. I think there's a culture or a financial culture within the industry that forces them to build in a certain manner because they work on 6-month time frames. And if you don't sell your house in 6 months, you get fired and all. So I think we do need to, as part of this work, investigate the actual model that builders, developers use and see if that can be adjusted to make this more suitable.
Very true. Any comments or questions on that?
Just a comment. It's welcomed improving standards and so on. And I think just touch on the costs and understanding the cost and how we reflect that in the intervention rates when applying for the combined authority funding in the future.
Councillor Kerry.
Well, I think there's two things we're trying to balance. One is the ambition of trying to go further and faster than what's just being required for building regulations, which comes back to the point that was raised earlier about industry will adapt, but we need to give them clarity so that they can adapt in a lead-in time. So there'll obviously have to be a phased approach to this, as I think it says in the board paper, so that we increasingly require it. But the second one is to understand how much of those costs are true costs. So how much are actually just an inertia and how much are the real costs on development, which is the bit that we're trying to work through at the moment, because ultimately it will start to impact on land values eventually as it goes through the system. So just trying to understand that as we work through. I think there is a danger though, Chair, that we wait until we've got all the evidence and all the information, and we don't give industry a clear statement about regionally us trying to be a national vanguard and a national lead in this area around advanced methods of construction. As Councillor Burt was referring to, we do have quite a history in the region of being quite innovative in this space around advanced modular construction and low carbon buildings, and it's really other regions are looking to steal a march on this region in this area. It's quite important for our USP and our economy that we really continue to be an epicenter of new modern building techniques.
I think the other issue as well, as you know, Gareth, it's my wish to try and get somebody doing advanced manufacturing housing in the West Midlands, because with the plan that we've all got to work to, with all the houses we've got to build, certainly in my mind, it makes sense to have somebody on your doorstep rather than shipping them in from, I think, Derby and further afield than that, because you cut down on the transport and the carbon footprint there too. But,
just coming back, Chair, to our devolution asks, obviously, if we secure commercial land funding, then we'd be able to do more to support AMC factories and other similar buildings.
that comes over. Okay, any further comments or questions? Can we accept that? Thank you,
Thank you
Pat.
very much. Thank
We
you.
will move on to the local transport plan now. Yes, you come on the bus.
So hopefully this will work. I've got some slides to share. So yeah, there you go. I've got some slides to share. So I'm hoping this will work. So just bear with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody see that? So yeah, thank you for having me today. So I'm going to talk just to give you a bit of an update on how we're getting on with our local transport plan, reimagining transport. So if you remember, I came here in July to give you a bit of an overview of our local transport plan core strategy, and I kind of introduced you to one of our big moves that sit underneath this core strategy, and that was the most closest kind of big move to the work that you do within this board. It's about bringing transport and land use closer together. So really I'm here today to kind of let you know how we're getting on with our local transport plan. As you probably read the report, we are taking that, we're taking a report on our local transport plan core strategy to gain final approval. I think it is on the 10th of February. So really the report is just to note the work that we've done and the progress and where we're at with that local transport plan. So it's going to CA board in February, and hopefully to gain final approval. We're also asking for approval to undertake consultation on what we call the big moves, which are the more detailed policies that sit underneath that overarching core strategy. So the 6 big moves, I know it's really small, but they cover different aspects of transport within our region. We've got behaviour change, accessible and inclusive places, walking, wheeling, scooting and riding, and public transport shared mobility. So I'm not going to talk you through all of those. I'm just going to focus on one of our big moves today, which is, like I said, mostly interlinked. So you might say, what is a big move? Well, like I said, it's those detailed policies and building blocks that sit under that long-term core strategy that we're hoping to get approval from CA board. So it's providing the detail, really, detailed policies. So it lays the actions needed to decarbonise and deliver our transport system, and hopefully, provide policies for the next 20 years, really. So within the big move, accessible and inclusive places, which is kind of focused on land use, transport and digital connectivity, we highlight some of the issues which we face. I won't go into details. I know you've already got these slides, and we sort of reference it in the report. We talk about poor accessibility, growing inequalities, and a growing car dependency within our region. And so we also are aware of poor digital connectivity. I suppose we're restricted by our streetscapes and the way our roads are designed. We can't do huge, road space reallocation. And we know that there's clusters of development can have cumulative impacts when they're pulled together. And we also know there's challenges with the governance as well of planning and transport. So we pull those, we highlight those within this big move and within our core strategy. So within this big move, we have 5 key policy areas. So I'll just talk you through each one very, very briefly. So the first area is accessibility policies. So we want to create a better framework for looking at how we look at accessibility. At the moment, we look at accessibility very much how far we live from a bus stop, and that's pretty much what we class as accessibility. But we know there's more barriers than that. Safety, whether you're travelling with children, gradients, weather, there's many different barriers that people face, and there's many different modes people take, like walking and cycling. So we want to look at that much more holistically and change how we look at accessibility in our region. We also see there's a real link between land use planning, digital connectivity and transport accessibility as well. So it's, you know, they all interrelate really. So again, we bring that out in our policies, and we want to measure those as well through our monitoring and evaluation. Our second set of policies are on spatial planning. So it's about making sure that the local plans that our local authorities deliver is in line with what we're doing in terms of our transport policies within that local transport plan core strategy. We also want to make sure that our own transport interventions are aligned with that of planned development that's proposed, and we're getting it in the right places at the right time. We also have policies within there about, you know, encouraging high density development, mixed use development, and obviously brownfield first as well, following on those wider CA policies, and work with our stakeholders to develop master plans, bringing in the wider transport issues that affect an area going through development. We then provide some policies on transport design as well. So again, I won't go through all these, you've got the slides, but it's enhancing, maximising accessibility, and we encourage that travel behaviour change. And we've got some more detailed design principles that are also within that big move. And we want to work closer with our local planning authorities and work together on those design principles, building them into their own planning policies and documents. And ensure that, I suppose, future transport development it covers that kind of future transport modes as well, like shared mobility, micro mobility, you know, considering EVs and connected and autonomous vehicles one day as well. So making sure we capture that transport innovation as well with the new developments. And then finally, we talk about digital infrastructure and the importance of digital investment as well. So linking in, making those links with high speed, reliable broadband, 5G connectivity. So, you know, making sure that our communities are well connected and our businesses as well within the region. And we want to make sure that we continue to lever and secure that investment within digital infrastructure, which is part of that wider transport investment and funding. And work with those digital network plans, making sure it's embedded in that wider structure. And then the last slide is about transport and digital platform policy. So it's making sure we continue to develop those travel planning tools to improve our customer information, travel information, and then again, enhancing our services and levels of accessibility through our shared mobility services, our digital platforms and our data sets as well, and sharing them with the transport providers. And finally, continue to provide digital access points across our transport system as well. You might see free Wi-Fi at stations, interchanges, and our public transport services. We want to continue to roll those out. So that's bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour of our policies and the big move, accessible and inclusive places. So that's me really.
What's missing from your transport plan?
What's missing? I'd like to think we've captured everything within our transport plan. I know we went out for consultation last year. We had some of the highest numbers of people, you know, respond to it. So
what's missing from your transport plan? I'll tell you, you know what I'm going to say. Where's my car? There is no provision for cars. I find it, and I'm not having to go at you, because I have a go at every transport plan and will continue to do so. We haven't got a tram in Walsall. it's an animal that we've got that we have to keep feeding, which worries me. And I made this point at the last WMCA meeting. We've got, you know, it's so easy. Oh, well, we've got the tram now. Yeah, but it keeps breaking down. It's unreliable. And public transport has to be reliable and on time and convenient. And some of those things we haven't got, especially out in the villages like Dorwich, which Andy's going to say, I'm sure. But I do get angry, not with you, but the car. It is still a mode of transport. And I have to tell you, I'm not a lover of scooters because I think they're dangerous. It is illegal, I'm told, to ride them, but they still sell them in Coleman Road. You know, I see youngsters now, 11, 12, 13 years of age, driving down the pavement at many miles an hour. And every day I see, well, probably an exaggeration, every couple of weeks, I see somebody's been killed on one of these e-scooters. The two reasons: one is you can't hear them. Two is they're driving on the pavement, or I have seen a group of 4 or 5 on Beacon Road, which is my own ward, at about 40 or 50 miles an hour in the middle of the road. You know, quite honestly, we're not seeing this. It's all right saying walk, wheel, cycle and scoot. Well, I'm not one of those. And I think we need to cater for those that aren't one of those. It's a common joke, actually, when I go to the Combined Authority and the meeting's at 10 o'clock and Andy Street will say to me, "You come on the train then, Mark?" I said, "Yeah, that's why I'm late." You know, because the train doesn't get me to where I want to go on time. So I really think with the message, certainly from my point of view, I don't know whether I get any support, Andy's put his hand up, but I just think the transport plan is flawed unless we cater for the car. I really do. Andy?
Well, I was going to say a few things, but I'll build on what you're saying. Yes, I think the car, you know, electric cars have a contribution to make. Now, if you live in the rural parts of the West Midlands, you can forget about bus service. And I find it a bit galling at times. We've got brownfield land in our rural part which cannot develop because there's no bus service. And that's, you know, that's a tragedy, because, you know, if you had a bus service there, it still wouldn't be good enough, and people will still, you commute by car from that development. You know, so there's no point. It's a point. It's one of these, you know, virtual signalling that's costing the environment, really. So that's, you know, so that's where I come from. But you haven't mentioned autonomous vehicles. You know, one of the costs of a public transport is the driver. You know, if we can get rid of the driver and have an autonomous vehicle going and collecting people, especially in the rural part, that could be a solution. So we need to think about that. We also need to think about how do we address the rural parts of the West Midlands in this transport strategy? It's okay having buses in Birmingham, but in the villages, would public transport forget about the buses? Why don't we have taxis doing it, for instance? You know, let the West Midlands, you know, hire taxis to pick up people when they want. We just need to have that rural aspect. Because without that, and in Solihull, we want a north-south public transport system, because there's no point being linked to Birmingham when our people want to work at the NEC or work south. So you need that north-south deployment route in the borough. Now, going back to broadband, I think you're right to raise it, but we need to do more as a West Midlands authority on this. Because where I am in Dorwich, I've got BT broadband, I've got Virgin broadband, all super fast. I soon have 5G blaring down at me. And there's yet a few miles away, there's settlements, you know, rural and urban, that don't have super fast broadband. And that's not fair. It's not inclusive. I don't need, and I no doubt City Fibre are going to appear in Dorwich soon because they see the competition. But we need to get them to go to the village, like Marston Green, areas of employment. So and it's part of your transport plan, isn't it? In essence, I know it's probably counterintuitive, but actually, if people can work from home with super fast broadband, we take the impact off the road and off, you know. So I think we just need to. So that's what I need to look at really as well, is actually force City Fibre, BT especially, to start laying out broadband to areas where they may not have enough custom ? That's not true. Because there's Berrymore estate in Shirley that BT, that's what they said. They said, why don't you put broadband? But BT said broadband is not an essential utility. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. You ask any child, what's the most important thing? Broadband, maybe power, gas, and water. And actually, power, electricity and water, you can probably facilitate yourself, but you can't facilitate broadband yourself. So broadband is probably the most important utility. And yet we had to pay them to actually install a kiosk so they could actually, and people had to pay out of their own pockets to get the infrastructure into that estate. So that's where the problem is. So we need to, maybe have a gentle word with BT and actually say, we need to start installing in areas that don't have good broadband. Okay, that's my little rant there.
I'm grateful for your comments there, because I couldn't see how broadband was fitting into a transport plan, really. I think it should fit into all strategies, but I still want my car included in the transport plan.
Well, cars are important, aren't they?
Well, yeah, use them. But according to I have to say, Philistine as I am, I'm not a lover of electric cars. Electric cars, in my view, is not the way forward. I think hydrogen will be far better than electric. Certainly, they're running a 911 Porsche on water now, so I saw last week. It'd be great to turn your tap on and fill your tank, wouldn't it? So that's very true. But buses are hydrogen, and very successful. But batteries, I mean, I was disappointed to see British Volt, the company that closed down last week, battery factory. Manufacture of the batteries has an effect on the carbon footprint. Disposal of them has an effect on the carbon footprint. And at the moment, charging them is worse than diesel, as I understand it. So maybe I was right in the first place.
I'm going to come back on that. I think you're wrong on all that, actually, Chairman. Yeah, I think electricity, hydrogen is made by electricity. So the first thing is actually, you might use electricity straight off rather than, because I think hydrogen has its place in large vehicles, refuse trucks, lorries, trains, buses. But that's no part. I think there's a danger of letting the public fill their car with hydrogen. I really do. So hydrogen is very, very quite dangerous, and I think you've got to, and the pressures you have to operate your car to have hydrogen in it is quite substantial. You have a 200 bar gas cylinder attached to your car. And that's not really.
Andy, that's not new. Back in 1972, I was driving a private hire vehicle in Birmingham with an LPG gas canister in the back of my car. Yeah, that LPG is still volatile.
It is, but that's about 10 bars, not 200 bar. So you got. But I take your point. I do take your point, but I think this is a rule in place for electric cars in balance, and I think they're still cheaper than diesel. Terms of thing, it's just a convenience, but we need to think about the infrastructure, making sure we've got the chargers in place. But they have a contribution to make.
Well, from the article I saw a few weeks ago over Christmas, people were queuing up for 3 hours to get their electric car charged, and 3 out of 5 chargers were broken, and the speedy chargers, if you like, are few and far between. So, I won't be in my lifetime that I'll buy an electric car, I'm sure. I might even get my arm twisted to have a scooter before that, and I don't want to do that. Sorry.
I agree with you, Chair. I vote with the Jaguar Land Rover and Ford. I believe the car is here to stay, so we need to bring that into the plan. And even with the tram that we got at the moment, we're developing the tram stations, but we're not looking at any car parking facilities. So the locals are up in arms that people will still drive to the stations to get on the tram. Yeah. They're not going to walk. And when we raised this in Sandwell, one of the stations that's bordering Dudley, is our people home. Next to it, schools and a community centre. And there's a tram station being put up. And the feedback we're getting is, we'll trial it when it opens up. I don't think we should wait to trial it. We should look at this now, the impact we're going to have. So very much. And secondly, boat industry bring us revenue. And the sand in Solihull, where I was based, and all the areas around us, the employment it gives us, and we should celebrate it. I hate to go against the grain, but I feel the car is here to stay, and we'll never get rid of it. Thank you.
We just got gone up in my estimation by about tenfold. The economy in the West Midlands was made years ago by the car, and I remember meeting Grant Shapps when he was secretary for something or other out in Wolverhampton, and I said we need to plan for the demise of the car factories. It fell on deaf ears then, but I hope someone will start listening now, because this is part of the plan, and unfortunately it annoys a lot of people to see how are we managing the car. But the answer is we'll force you off the road, we'll tax you off the road. Well, I'm sorry, you know, there are people that rely upon those vehicles to get to work. You know, I mean, I was talking to a young sales assistant in one of the supermarkets on the bus strike. She had to pay £25 for a taxi to get to work. One, that showed commitment, but that shows that the people don't care. The people are going on strike. They don't care about the people and the inconvenience. It's all right for today. But my real serious issue with this transport plan and any other transport plan, there is no provision in there for the car. And I think the issue about car parking at railway stations is another very strong point that's not covered in the transport plan. I think that if you go around Tyne Bridge, and it's even worse, the car park can be empty when you put a charge on. If you go to Shenstone now, Shenstone railway station, it's surrounded by cars, but the car park's empty because there's a charge. And those are the things. I remember Sir William Francis saying to me when I was, God forbid, in the days I was a director of the Black Country Development Corporation, and they came along with this idea of a tram, and he said, so you're telling me, he said to the presenter, you're telling me that everybody's going to get out of their cars and get on this particular mode of transport? And I said, yeah. And he said, I'm not convinced. And to be fair, yes, the tram has filled the void. But VLR, whether that'll work, I don't know. I'm not going to give Tim airtime because otherwise he'll take over. But at the end of the day, some of the arguments he puts forward now is why do we have to reinvent the wheel when we've got something that we could utilise on the ground? And I think that's where we've got to go. And I make the point, and I've said this to the Mayor, I've said it to Transport for West Midlands, we've got a tram. And it's like a donkey. You've got to keep feeding it. Whether it's right or wrong for solving the transport issue is irrelevant. We've got it now, and it keeps costing us millions, and then we're looking to extend that. That cannot be sustained in my view. But as I say, I am a Philistine, and I'll get in my car every day. And he came with me today as well. So, you know. Okay, so can I just make that point pretty strongly, I think. The car needs to have a place in any transport plan, and the future of the tram has to be assessed as to whether the investment we're putting in there is the return on capital that we'd like to see. I don't know whether we'll ever get Elon Musk over here with his autonomous cars and vehicles, but it's something for the future. I mean, the maglev system we had at the airport, you know, that ran for years and years and years. It was great, you know, but you know, times change. Andy,
we have an autonomous vehicle in Solihull in the NEC.
Yes, yes.
So we are. It's not that far off. Having, you know, rather than having a tram, you know, linking parts of, you know, to Birmingham, we actually have an autonomous vehicle. That's the way forward.
Indeed, I think you're right, Gary.
Yeah, just to, so that's really, really helpful. Just part of the reason for bringing it to the board is actually to show the really strong links that I think you've referred to, particularly between land use planning and transport, and between what we're trying to do in terms of brownfield regeneration on this board, and actually the devolution asks, and the importance of investing in the transport infrastructure for all modes. come back to the point that Councillor Bird has raised. So I guess we leave Helen to take away the key arguments from the board around provision for car parking, but also I think if it's okay with you, Chair, I think it would be worth having regular updates to this board because of that very strong connection between transport investment for all modes, including the car, and what happens at this board in terms of housing and land delivery.
I had a conversation with an architect about 3 years ago who came up with what I believe was a revolutionary idea. We talk about car parking and we talk about residential. He came up with this idea. I hope there's somebody listening out there that'll take this up. And he built, or was looking, he got the designs for a 4-storey car park at a hospital. Because when you go to a hospital, it's just a sea of cars on ground floor. However, on the outside of this car park was apartments or flats, whatever you want to call them. Single aspect, in other words, you can only look forward. There's nothing behind you because it's a car park. But they had the separation of access for the residential property and the car park. The statistics tell me that the car park space at a hospital turns over 10 times in a day. Now that is quite a money generator. And if you lease the car park to railway stations, to hospitals, to education establishments, and those single aspect flats were rented out or indeed used for key workers, then in 10 years you get a payback on a 25-year lease. After 15 years, the remaining 15 years, the income goes to the hospital or the person who owns the freehold of the land. Now, that's something that perhaps I would like to see advanced, because you're providing residential accommodation at lower cost for key workers in areas where car parking is probably the prime reason for that freehold piece of land. And I look at this with HS2. You know, there are people who will travel on that train. Again, I'm not a lover of HS2, but it's there now, it's going ahead. It's the same donkey we're feeding strawberries to. But there will be business people who could rent, buy those residential apartments which surround the car park where their car is parked overnight, while they do their business in the area that the train has taken them to. So I just wonder whether we could put something, feed that into the LTP. It's not my idea, by the way. My architect. I won't tell him that because he might want a commission. But it's something that's, I hate the phrase thinking out of the box, but it's something that we could look at, because I make the point, especially at hospitals where those surface level car parks, which everybody say, oh yeah, your surface level car park, but you get there and all you see is a sea of cars, and that's exactly what you've got at the NEC. You know, you've got 4 or 5 car parks there, or a number of car parks. I haven't been there for a long time now, but it's underutilising that particular piece of freehold, and it would contribute towards the residential properties that we have to provide as local authorities. But that would be a brownfield site. Saving the green belt.
Yeah, I will certainly, with the big moves, like we said, we're going out to consultation, so there's plenty of opportunity for people to have their say. So I will definitely take your point back and talk to my manager and the team that are writing this LTP. I can't promise anything. I guess it depends on all the other consultations that come in and people's views. But I'm going to take it back and let him know.
I'm not the panacea of all ills, but what I do think is we need to think of innovative ways of doing it. We just had a local government peer review in Walsall, and one of my officers, I don't know who it was, said, when Councillor Bird says that's where we're going, that's where we're going. And to be fair, I would like to see that your manager looking at those proposals and saying, have we got it right? Because local authorities traditionally do something, 5 years later look at it and say, well, that didn't work. What should we do? Oh, we'll do it again. And sadly, that's the culture that we have. We've got to look at new ways of working, new ways of transport. As I wrote down here, I don't normally write things down, transport is only ever any good if it's reliable and on time. And I think that's one of the things we have to do. Make it reliable, make it on time. I don't know, you know, the train from Walsall to Birmingham, New Street, is 20 minutes. I use that when I go to Birmingham Council because I'm not going to put money into Birmingham Council's coffers paying a car parking fee. But at the end of the day, I do think some of what has been said today needs to be taken back and put into that, even if it's an appendix. What's your thoughts on this? You know. Okay, thank you. Karen?
Just on the specific example you gave on the NHS, we will take that up with them through the public land work on how do we use both NHS land and Network Rail land in a completely different way. So we'll take that.
My commission rate is 10%, by the way. I'm cheap. Okay, thank you, Helen. We won't shoot the messenger, but I think there's some meaningful discussion there, especially with Andy out in the villages and, you know, the car park raised by my colleague from Sandwell. I think it's very, very important because people who live around there will argue, oh, well, you've got the convenience of being by the station, you've got the income. It's like living by a school, really. You know, you don't want to do it from choice.
No, I will take it. I will take all these comments back. I've made lots of detailed notes here, so definitely see what we can do.
Weller, W-E-L-L-E-R. Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Righto. Moving on then into the private section now, as I understand it.